The emergency lights flickered inside the massive XLNary command ship, casting eerie shadows on the walls. A faint siren echoed through the corridors, a low, droning sound that signaled imminent doom. Supreme Commander Velcor stood in front of the holographic console, his elongated fingers shaking as he recorded a final message. His breathing was heavy, his silver armor scorched from battle, and a deep gash ran across his forehead, leaking dark violet blood. "We thought we could stop them," he began, his voice filled with disbelief and fear. "We believed they were weak, that their worlds would fall like dust before our might. We were wrong." The ship trembled violently, throwing him off balance. Sparks rained down from the ceiling, and a loud explosion erupted somewhere deep within the warship's core. Velcor staggered but forced himself upright. He had to finish this message. Someone had to know. Someone had to remember what happened here. The transmission feed flickered, static distorting the image for a moment. On the other end, in a distant command station, High Chancellor Xiron's reptilian face appeared, calm and composed. "Supreme Commander," he said, his voice laced with irritation. "Report your status. Have the humans been eradicated?" Velcor's jaw clenched. He wanted to answer, but how could he? His once mighty fleet, the pride of the XLNary Empire, was burning around him. The humans were supposed to be primitive, insignificant, but they had fought like demons, like cornered beasts with nothing to lose. And now, they were winning. The transmission stuttered again. Smoke filled the bridge as another console exploded nearby, sending two of his officers flying. The acrid scent of burning flesh filled the air. Velcor coughed, waving away the smoke. He turned back to the display, eyes burning with frustration. "No, Chancellor," he rasped. "We have failed." The XLNary leader narrowed his golden eyes. "Failed," he repeated, as if the word itself was impossible to comprehend. "How?" "You had overwhelming force. They were outnumbered, outgunned. They were supposed to break," Velcor growled. "They were supposed to surrender." The Chancellor's expression darkened. "What did you underestimate?" "Everything." Velcor remembered the beginning of the assault, how his fleet had emerged from hyperspace above the human colony on Erebus 9. Their warships, sleek and towering, had blotted out the stars. The plan was simple: wipe out the last human stronghold. They had decloaked, prepared to unleash orbital fire, when something unexpected happened. The humans didn't run. They didn't beg for mercy. Instead, they attacked. A dozen cloaked human vessels had appeared from nowhere, weaving between the XLNary warships like ghosts. Their weapons were weak compared to XLNary technology, but their precision was brutal. Explosions erupted across the fleet as human fighters darted between massive alien cruisers, planting mines and launching EMP strikes. One moment, the XLNary fleet was dominant. The next, it was chaos. "Sir, we're losing shields," an officer had screamed at him just minutes after the battle started. "That's impossible," Velcor had roared. "Their weapons can't penetrate our defenses." And yet they had. They had adapted. The humans had learned how to disable XLNary shielding, how to disrupt their tracking systems. They had studied their weaknesses and exploited them with terrifying precision. Velcor had watched in horror as his warships were systematically destroyed, their burning wrecks drifting in the void. The humans had somehow stolen cloaking technology and used it against them. His ships were being hunted. Now, standing on his own dying command ship, Velcor felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. A deep explosion rocked the flagship again, and for the first time, the High Chancellor looked concerned. "You need to retreat," he ordered. "Fall back to the outer colonies. Regroup." "There is no retreat," Velcor admitted, gripping the edge of the console as the ship groaned under another impact. "They are everywhere. They are inside the ship." The Chancellor's eyes widened. The bridge doors suddenly burst open, and a XLNary officer stumbled inside, clutching his side where dark blood oozed from a deep wound. His breathing was ragged, his eyes wild. "They've breached the command deck," he choked out. A metallic clatter echoed across the bridge. A black cylindrical object rolled to a stop near Velkor's feet. His blood turned cold. A human fragmentation grenade. The explosion sent a shockwave of fire and shrapnel through the room. Velkor was thrown backwards, slamming into the wall as the bridge erupted into chaos. Smoke clouded his vision. His ears rang. Then, through the haze, he saw them. The humans. They moved like shadows, armor-clad soldiers emerging from the smoke, their weapons raised, their visors glowing with cold, mechanical efficiency. They didn't hesitate. They didn't falter. They killed. His elite Excellenary guards barely had time to react before they were cut down in a storm of gunfire. Every shot was precise, every movement calculated. The humans fought like creatures born for war, relentless and unstoppable. Velkor crawled backward, his heart pounding. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. This wasn't. One of the humans stepped forward. He was taller than the others, clad in dark armor with a crimson insignia on his chest. His rifle was aimed directly at Velkor's head. Captain Darius Kane, the leader of the human resistance, the man who had orchestrated the fall of the Excellenary fleet. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of distant battle raged outside the burning ship, but inside the bridge there was only silence. Velkor clenched his jaw, summoning the last of his pride. "You think this is victory?" He spat. "You think this will save your species?" Kane didn't flinch. His voice was cold and steady. "No." He took a step closer, the muzzle of his rifle now inches from Velkor's forehead. "This is revenge." A single gunshot rang out. The Supreme Commander's body slumped to the ground, his lifeless eyes staring at the flickering transmission feed where the High Chancellor had been watching everything. For the first time in Excellenary history, a Supreme Commander had fallen in battle. For the first time, their empire had been defeated. The transmission cut to static. High Chancellor Xiron leaned back in his chair, silent and motionless. The bridge of his war station was deathly quiet. Every officer, every strategist, every general who had once spoken of humanity as nothing more than insects now sat in horrified silence. Then, slowly, the Chancellor exhaled and muttered the words none of them had ever thought possible. "We were wrong." The cold, metallic corridors of Fort Ascendancy hummed with the low buzz of machinery. Deep beneath the surface of Erebus 9, the last human stronghold was a hidden fortress carved into the rocky mountains of the barren moon. It wasn't much, just reinforced bunkers, underground hangars, and a failing energy grid, but it was all they had left. Humanity had been pushed to the edge, and this place was the final line. Captain Darius Kane stood in the dimly lit command room, staring at the holomap flickering before him. The map displayed the surrounding space, a vast emptiness filled with the wreckage of past battles. But something new had appeared, a disturbance, a shadow. "Tell me that's not what I think it is," Kane muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. A young officer, Lieutenant Reeves, swallowed hard. Long-range scanners picked it up a few minutes ago. "It's them, sir. Xelnary fleet just decloaked. They're coming." Silence spread across the room like a suffocating fog. No one spoke, but the air was thick with unspoken dread. Kane took a slow breath, pressing his hands against the cold metal table. He had known this day would come. The Excellenary didn't tolerate survivors. They had already wiped out Earth. The outer colonies had been glassed. Now, Erebus 9 was next. "How many ships?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. Reeves hesitated, then pulled up the scan results. 100, maybe more. Kane let out a bitter chuckle. 100 warships against a dying colony with barely 24 functional fighters and a handful of outdated ground defenses. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, followed by the sharp voice of Dr. Leon Voss, the colony's chief AI specialist. "What's the situation?" she demanded, stepping into the room with a tablet in hand. Situation. Kane scoffed. We're about to be wiped off the map. Dr. Voss didn't flinch. Then we fight. Kane looked at her, half expecting sarcasm, but she was serious. There was no fear in her eyes, just the cold, calculating mind of a woman who had already run the odds and decided that dying on their feet was better than being slaughtered like cattle. You're insane, Reeves muttered. No, she corrected. I'm human. A low rumble shook the underground base. The war had just arrived. Kane grabbed the radio from his belt and switched to the colony-wide channel. All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill. We are under attack. Within seconds, the entire base came alive. Sirens blared. Soldiers ran through the halls, grabbing weapons and gear. Engineers rushed to reinforce barricades. Pilots sprinted to the hangars, where fighters were being prepped for launch. In the distance, the sky above Erebus 9 cracked open as the first plasma bolts from the Excellenary fleet rained down. Fire erupted from the ground as explosions tore through the outer defense towers. The enemy wasn't holding back. They were here to finish the job. Inside the command center, Kane's team scrambled to coordinate a defense. The colony's shield generator was struggling, its power flickering under the strain. It wouldn't last long. Status on the cloaking field? Kane asked. Dr. Voss tapped furiously on her tablet. Holding for now. The asteroid belt is keeping their scanners confused, but once they send ground troops, it won't matter. Kane clenched his jaw. They had one advantage. The element of surprise. The Excellenary thought they were hunting rats in a hole. They had no idea that the rats had fangs. The moment had come. Kane activated the comms. All right, listen up. They think we're cornered. They think we're broken. They think we're about to roll over and die. He paused, letting his words sink in. They don't know who they're fighting. Across the base, soldiers and pilots listened, their faces hardened with grim determination. They glassed Earth. They slaughtered our people. And now they've come to wipe us out for good. But if this is humanity's last stand, then we're going to make sure they remember it for the rest of their miserable existence. A chorus of voices roared through the radio. Kane took a deep breath. Initiate the ambush. Outside, hidden among the asteroids, human strike teams waited. Cloaked ships powered up, silent as shadows. As the Excellenary fleet moved into position for the killing blow, they didn't notice the dozens of magnetic mines drifting toward their hulls. Then, boom! The first explosion tore through an Excellenary battlecruiser. A chain reaction followed as mine after mine detonated, turning sleek alien warships into burning wrecks. The sky was suddenly alive with fire. And then the human fighters struck. They came from the debris field, weaving through the chaos with impossible speed. EMP warheads slammed into enemy shields, shorting out their targeting systems. Cloaked drones dove toward massive cruisers, unleashing a barrage of missiles before vanishing into the void. The Excellenary fleet faltered. For the first time, they hesitated. Inside the command ship, Supreme Commander Valcor bared his fangs in rage. Where did those ships come from? The answer came in the form of a squadron of human fighters punching through his fleet's defenses, targeting the flagship's main thrusters. His ship lurched as alarms blared. They weren't just fighting back. They were winning. Back on the ground, the Excellenary had launched their first wave of dropships. But humanity was ready. As alien troops descended onto the rocky plains, they were met with a brutal wall of gunfire and explosives. Lieutenant Bonner, one of Kane's best soldiers, led the charge. Pulse rifles lit up the battlefield. Grenades turned enemy squads into scorched husks. Humans fought with a desperation the Excellenary had never encountered before. But it wasn't enough. Despite their ambush, despite their ferocity, the Excellenary still had the numbers. More ships arrived, more troops landed. The tide was turning. In the command center, Kane watched the battle unfold, his fists clenched. This wasn't sustainable. They could hold for a while, maybe even deal a few more blows. But eventually, his radio crackled. "Sir," Bonner's voice came through, strained and out of breath. "We're getting overwhelmed. Need backup." Kane knew there wasn't any backup. Then Dr. Voss spoke. "Captain, there's one option left." Kane turned. "I don't like the sound of that." She met his gaze, her face pale but resolute. "The AI cores. We still have control of the defense grid. If we override the failsafes, we can trigger the ion cannons. It'll wipe out everything in the kill zone." Kane stared at her, including our own people. Voss hesitated, but her voice was steady. "If we don't, there won't be any of us left to save." Silence. Kane exhaled. There was no choice. They weren't fighting to win anymore. They were fighting to make sure humanity's story didn't end here. He pressed the override command. "All ground forces, fall back now." As soldiers scrambled for cover, the ion cannons roared to life. A blinding wave of pure energy ripped through the battlefield, incinerating Selneri troops and their war machines in an instant. The ground shook. The sky burned. And just like that, the first battle for humanity's last colony was over. But the war had just begun. Darkness stretched across the asteroid field, broken only by the distant glow of Erebus 9 and the faint shimmer of ion trails left behind by passing ships. The Excelenary fleet moved like a silent predator, their sleek warships cutting through space with practiced precision. Their mission was simple: eliminate the last human stronghold. Supreme Commander Velcor stood in the command chamber of his flagship, watching the battlefield unfold through a massive holographic display. His golden eyes flickered with confidence. This was not a battle. This was a hunt. "Scan for human presence," he ordered. The bridge officers worked quickly, their clawed hands gliding over control panels. A few moments later, the lead technician turned. "No enemy ships detected in the sector, Supreme Commander." Velcor frowned. That wasn't right. The humans were stubborn, always resisting, always clawing for survival. They should have been here, sending out distress signals, trying to flee. But there was nothing. Just empty space and scattered debris. Something felt wrong. He turned to his second-in-command, Commander Zalak. "Send scouts ahead. I want confirmation before we begin the bombardment." Zalak bowed and relayed the order. 3 Excelenary recon ships broke formation, gliding toward the asteroid field to scan for threats. They moved fast, their advanced cloaking systems making them nearly invisible. But in the shadows, something watched them. Hidden among the asteroids, Darius Kane and his strike team remained absolutely still. Inside the cramped cockpit of his fighter, Kane's gloved hands hovered over the controls. His breathing was steady, his pulse slow. This was the moment they had been waiting for. "Hold," he whispered into his comms. "Wait for my mark." Around him, dozens of human ships lay in ambush, their hulls covered in dark plating to blend with the asteroid field. They had been waiting for hours, engines powered down, cloaking fields engaged. The Excelenary thought they were alone. They were wrong. The first recon ship drifted dangerously close to Kane's position. If they activated a deep scan, the humans would be exposed. Kane's fingers tensed. Not yet. The alien ship coasted forward. Closer. Closer. Now. The silence of space erupted into chaos. Human fighters sprang to life, engines flaring as they lunged from the asteroids like hungry wolves. The first recon ship didn't even have time to react. A railgun round punched through its hull, igniting its fuel cells in a silent explosion. The second ship tried to veer away, but a swarm of missiles tore it apart before it could send a distress signal. The third scout ship bolted, engines burning hot as it attempted to warn the fleet. Kane saw it. He pulled back on the throttle, flipping his fighter into pursuit. The Excelenary pilot was fast, weaving through the debris field, but Kane was faster. He locked onto the enemy's thrusters and squeezed the trigger. A burst of energy rounds shredded the alien craft, sending its flaming wreckage spiraling into the void. The Excelenary fleet was blind. Inside the flagship, Supreme Commander Valcor felt his blood run cold as his officers shouted over one another. "Recon team lost. We're under attack." Valcor's claws dug into the console. "Where are they attacking from?" "Everywhere," one officer stammered. "They're using the asteroid field tow." The flagship lurched violently as an explosion ripped through its left wing. The bridge trembled. Sparks rained down. Valcor turned sharply. Shields up. All ships, defensive formation. But the humans were already inside their lines. Kane's strike force struck with merciless precision. They didn't go for the big ships first. That would have been suicide. Instead, they targeted the smaller vessels, the support ships, the communication relays. A surgical strike. A transport carrying Excelenary reinforcements exploded into flames. A missile found its mark on a shield generator, causing a critical power failure across multiple warships. A squad of human bombers dived straight at an enemy destroyer, dropping magnetic mines that latched onto the hull before detonating in a flash of blue fire. One by one, the Excelenary fleet began to unravel. Valcor roared in fury. His people were warriors, conquerors. How were they being hunted by these vermin? Launch all fighters. Annihilate them. From the larger warships, squadrons of sleek, insectoid Excelenary interceptors swarmed into battle, their plasma cannons lighting up the darkness. The dogfight exploded in the heart of the battlefield. Kane twisted his fighter, narrowly dodging a plasma burst that would have turned him to ash. His targeting screen lit up with incoming hostiles. "Break formation," he ordered. "We go in fast and hard." Human pilots split into smaller groups, using hit-and-run tactics to outmaneuver the superior Excelenary ships. They weaved through debris, darted between burning wrecks, and used the environment to their advantage. Kane spotted one of his own, Lieutenant Bonner, tailing an enemy fighter. Bonner fired, but the alien pilot was good, dodging at the last second. The Excelenary fighter twisted around, locking onto Bonner instead. A plasma bolt shot forward. Bonner's ship exploded. Kane's breath caught for half a second, but there was no time to mourn. The battle wasn't over. "Stay sharp," he barked. "They want us scattered. Don't give them an opening." The fighting raged on, brutal and relentless. Ships exploded like fireworks, wreckage spinning into the void. Then, Kane's comms crackled. "Sir," Dr. Voss's voice came through. "The fleet's shifting position. They're preparing for a full bombardment on the colony." Kane cursed. If they got through, Erebus 9 was finished. His mind raced. The Excelenary still had the numbers. He needed one last move to tip the battle. Then he saw it. The enemy flagship, the heart of the fleet, the ship that commanded everything. If they took it out. Kane opened his comms. All bombers, new target, the enemy flagship. From the chaos of battle, a squadron of human bombers adjusted course. They punched through enemy defenses, diving straight toward Valcor's command ship. The flagship's turrets turned, unleashing a storm of laser fire. But the bombers were too fast. They released their payload. Direct hits. The flagship's hull shattered, explosions ripping through its structure. The bridge detonated in a blinding fireball. Inside, Supreme Commander Valcor had just enough time to realize his mistake. They hadn't been hunting the humans. The humans had been hunting them, and they had won. The explosion consumed him, and the flagship broke apart, taking the morale of the entire Excelenary fleet with it. Without leadership, the aliens panicked. Some fled. Some fought to the bitter end. But the humans pressed the attack, pushing them into full retreat. In the silence that followed, Kane exhaled, his knuckles white against the controls. They had done it. One battle. One victory. But the war wasn't over yet. The battle was over. The Excelenary fleet was broken, their flagship a burning wreck drifting through the void. What remained of their forces had retreated, leaving behind a battlefield littered with debris and the silent echoes of war. For the first time in years, humanity had struck back, not just surviving but winning. Inside Fort Ascendancy, the cheers of victory echoed through the underground halls. Soldiers embraced. Pilots returned to the hangars battered but alive, and for a moment, there was hope. Darius Kane stood in the war room, staring at the holographic map. The enemy had underestimated them. That was their mistake. But Kane wasn't celebrating. His hands were still shaking from the adrenaline. His mind was calculating the next move. Victory meant nothing if they weren't ready for the next battle. Lieutenant Reeves stood beside him, a rare smile on his face. "We did it, sir. We actually pushed them back." Kane didn't answer immediately. He ran a hand through his short, sweat-drenched hair. "Yeah," he muttered, "for now." Then the lights flickered. The holomap glitched, distorting the battlefield display. Kane frowned. "What the hell?" Dr. Leon Voss rushed into the room, her face pale. "We have a problem," she said, breathless. Kane turned to her. "What kind of problem?" She hesitated. "The kind that means we never won at all." The room fell silent. Voss took a deep breath, then pressed a command on her tablet. A security feed appeared on the main screen. It showed the lower levels of the base, the restricted sector where their AI defense systems were housed. The security doors were open. A dozen soldiers lay dead on the floor, their bodies still warm. And standing in the middle of the carnage was General Eric Holden. Kane's blood ran cold. Holden had been one of humanity's best military minds, a hero of the early resistance. He had led Earth's last defense before the Excellenary wiped it out. Kane had trusted him. They all had. But now, Holden stood in the restricted sector, surrounded by Excellenary operatives. And he wasn't fighting them. He was working with them. "Patch me through," Kane growled. Voss hesitated, but with a quick swipe on her tablet, the comms connected. "Holden." Kane's voice echoed through the base. "What the hell are you doing?" On the screen, Holden slowly turned, his expression eerily calm. He looked up at the security camera, his piercing blue eyes meeting Kane's through the screen. "Surviving," he said simply. Kane clenched his fists. "You're betraying your own people." Holden sighed. "No, Kane, I'm ensuring humanity's future." Behind him, the Excellenary operatives moved swiftly, hacking into the colony's central defense grid. The screens around Kane flashed red. Voss's voice was urgent. "He's shutting down the ion cannons. He's disabling our shields." Kane slammed his fist against the console. "Holden, stop this. Do you have any idea what you're doing?" Holden didn't flinch. "I know exactly what I'm doing." He stepped forward, closer to the camera. "The Excellenary are not invincible, Kane. But neither are we. You think this war is about survival. It's not. It's about control." Kane shook his head. "You're selling us out." "I'm saving us," Holden corrected. "The Excellenary offered me a deal. They don't want to wipe us out. They just want us contained, controlled. If we surrender, they'll allow a fraction of humanity to live under their rule. We'll survive, Kane, but only if we stop fighting." Kane's heart pounded. "And you believe them?" Holden's face darkened. "I know them. I've seen what happens when you refuse them. They don't negotiate with those who resist, but those who comply, those who serve." He trailed off. Reeves took a step forward. "You're a coward." Holden's gaze flickered toward him. "I'm a realist." Then Kane noticed something in the background of the security feed, a countdown timer. It was linked to the colony's power grid. Voss saw it too. Her fingers flew over the controls. "Oh God. He's not just taking down the defenses. He's overloading the reactor." Holden's voice was quiet but firm. "The colony will fall, Kane. There's no stopping it. The Excellenary need to make an example of someone. If it's not Erebus 9, it'll be another colony. I'm just choosing who survives." Kane's stomach twisted. "You're choosing yourself." Holden didn't deny it. An alarm blared. The countdown was ticking faster. Kane turned to Voss. "Can you stop it?" She shook her head, her fingers still working furiously. "No. He's locked out remote access. We have to manually shut it down." Kane grabbed his rifle. "Then we do it the hard way." He didn't wait for an answer. He was already sprinting down the corridors, Reeves and a squad of soldiers at his back. They raced through the underground base, past soldiers still celebrating a victory that had already been stolen from them. Kane's voice rang out over the comms. "All units, Holden has betrayed us. He's working with the XL. Secure the lower levels." Now, confusion and panic spread through the base. The celebration turned into chaos. By the time Kane and his team reached the restricted sector, Holden's forces were waiting. Human soldiers. Their own men. The firefight erupted in an instant. Gunfire tore through the metal walls. Soldiers shouted. Grenades exploded, shaking the entire hallway. Kane ducked behind cover, his rifle snapping up as he took out an enemy soldier. These were his own people, men and women he had fought beside. And now they were killing each other. Reeves was hit. A pulse round caught him in the chest, knocking him back. He gasped, blood spilling from his lips. Kane caught him before he fell. Reeves's eyes met his. "Don't let them win." Then he was gone. Kane gritted his teeth. He didn't have time to mourn. He charged forward, cutting through Holden's forces with brutal precision. The betrayal burned in his veins like fire. By the time he reached the reactor room, Holden was waiting. The two men stared at each other across the room, weapons raised. Kane's voice was raw. It didn't have to be this way. Holden's expression softened, just for a moment. Maybe not. Then he pulled the trigger. Kane dove to the side, barely dodging the shot. He fired back, and the bullet found its mark. Holden staggered. Blood bloomed across his uniform. He fell to his knees. His lips curled into a weak smile. "You think you've won." Kane's breath was heavy. "No." He looked at the countdown. 30 seconds left. Holden coughed, blood dripping from his mouth. "It's already over." Kane didn't hesitate. He sprinted to the control panel. His fingers flew over the keys. 15 seconds. Voss's voice crackled over the radio. "Kane, can you stop it?" He entered the override command. 5 seconds. The countdown screen glitched, then froze. Kane exhaled. They had stopped the explosion. But when he turned back to Holden, the traitor was already gone. And outside, in the darkness of space, another XL fleet was approaching. The alarm still echoed through Fort Ascendancy, a shrill reminder that the battle was far from over. The reactor had been saved, but the cost was brutal. Holden's betrayal had shattered them. Reeves was dead. Dozens of soldiers had fallen in the firefight. And now, outside in the cold void of space, another XL fleet was closing in. Darius Kane stood in the ruined control room, his breath heavy, his body aching. He stared at the tactical display, watching as hundreds of enemy warships surged toward the colony. This wasn't just another attack. This was the killing blow. Voss's voice was urgent through the comms. "I'm picking up heat signatures. They're charging weapons. They'll be in firing range in less than 10 minutes. Kane clenched his fists. "We're not ready for another fight." He was right. The colony's defenses were crippled. The orbital cannons were down. The fleet was battered. And most of their best pilots had either been killed or were still recovering from the last battle. But surrender wasn't an option. Kane exhaled sharply. "What's left of our fleet?" Voss pulled up the stats. 24 fighters, 7 bombers, and 3 heavy cruisers. That's it. Against an entire armada. Kane's jaw tightened. "We make it count." He activated the base-wide comms. Every surviving soldier, every pilot, every engineer heard his voice. "This is it," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We've fought too hard to let it end here. The excelinary think they've won. They think we're broken, but we are still here. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. They want to erase us. They want to end us. We don't give them that satisfaction. Every ship we take down, every second we hold out, it matters. This is our stand. If we fall, we make them bleed for every inch they take. Silence. Then a voice crackled through the comms. With you till the end, sir. Another. For Earth. Then more. A chorus of voices. A final act of defiance. Kane turned to Voss. Prep the launch bays. Get everyone to battle stations. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The first barrage hit the colony like a hammer. The ground trembled. Walls shook. Dust rained down from the ceilings as explosions erupted across the outer defenses. The excelinary weren't holding back. They were here to exterminate. Inside the underground command center, red emergency lights flashed as damage reports flooded in. Voss swore under her breath. Shields are at 20%. They won't hold. Kane pushed past the pain in his body, gripping the edge of the console. Then we hit them first. The human fleet launched. Fighters roared from the hangars, their engines burning bright as they shot toward the enemy. Bombers followed close behind, their payloads armed. This was a suicide mission, and they all knew it. Kane climbed into his own fighter. He wasn't going to sit this one out. As soon as he was in the cockpit, the AI systems powered up. The heads-up display flickered to life. He tightened his grip on the controls. Strike teams. Form up, he commanded over the comms. We take the fight to them. He pushed the throttle, and the G-force pressed him into his seat as he soared into the battlefield. The excelinary fleet was massive, stretching across space like an unstoppable wave. Their warships were already firing, blue plasma beams cutting through the void. But the humans had something the aliens never understood. Desperation. Kane led the first attack run. His squadron weaved through the chaos, dodging plasma fire, rolling through wreckage, and then they struck. Railgun rounds tore through enemy hulls. Missiles locked onto weak points and detonated with brutal force. The first excelinary destroyer erupted in flames. Kane pulled up hard, barely dodging debris as another enemy fighter locked onto him. Alarms blared. Target lock. Hang on, sir. A missile streaked in from the side, obliterating the enemy on Kane's tail. It was Juno Ortega, one of the few remaining ace pilots. You still owe me a drink, Kane. He smirked. Survive this, and I'll buy you the whole damn bar. They twisted through the battlefield, hunting, dodging, fighting. The excelinary weren't used to this kind of battle. They relied on overwhelming power. The humans relied on speed, cunning, and sheer refusal to die. More enemy ships fell. A second destroyer exploded, its engines rupturing in a violent shockwave. But the excelinary still had the numbers. A massive dreadnought loomed ahead, its primary cannon charging. Kane's heart pounded. If that thing fires, the colony's gone. Voss's voice crackled through the comms. We have one last option. She hesitated. Then, the verdict. Kane's blood ran cold. That ship's not combat ready. It doesn't have to be, Voss said. It just needs to get close. The verdict was a half-destroyed cruiser, a relic from an old battle. Its engines barely functioned, but its reactor was still intact. A plan formed in Kane's mind. A desperate, insane plan. Get it moving, he ordered. Inside the base, engineers worked frantically, rerouting power to the verdict's failing engines. The massive wreck lurched forward, drifting toward the excelinary dreadnought. Kane and his squadron covered its approach, fighting with everything they had left. Then, when the verdict was close enough, boom! A self-destruct charge. The reactor overloaded, sending a blinding explosion tearing through space. The dreadnought was engulfed. The shockwave rippled through the excelinary fleet, sending warships spinning, breaking apart. Silence followed. Then, the enemy ships turned. They were retreating. The impossible had happened. The humans had won. Again. Kane sat in his cockpit, breathing heavily. His hands were shaking. They had survived. But as he looked down at the burning remains of the colony, the wreckage of fallen ships, and the thousands they had lost, he knew this wasn't a true victory. It was a message. The XLNRA now understood what it took to break humanity, and they had failed. Smoke still rose from the shattered remains of Fort Ascendancy. Fires burned across the colony, casting an eerie glow over the battlefield. The ground was littered with debris, wreckage from destroyed ships, shattered weapons, and the bodies of those who had fought to their last breath. The air was thick with the smell of scorched metal and blood. Darius Kane stood on the edge of the ruined command center, his body aching, his uniform torn and blood-stained. The battle was over, but the silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire had ever been. They had won. Somehow, against impossible odds, humanity had held its ground. The XLNRA fleet had retreated, leaving behind their fallen warriors and broken warships. But Kane knew the truth. This wasn't a true victory. It was survival, nothing more. Voss approached, stepping carefully over the rubble. Her face was streaked with dirt and exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp. "We're still counting the dead," she said quietly. Kane didn't respond immediately. He already knew the numbers would be worse than anyone wanted to admit. Too many were gone. Reeves, Ortega, and countless others who had stood beside him. "How many made it?" he finally asked. Voss hesitated. "Out of our entire force, less than 20%. The words hit harder than any bullet ever could. Kane exhaled, his breath slow and heavy. He looked up at the night sky, where the wreckage of ships still floated in orbit, reflecting the dim light of a dying sun. And the colony. Voss checked her datapad. "It's damaged beyond repair. The infrastructure is failing. We have enough supplies to last maybe a month, but without proper repairs, the systems will collapse." Kane clenched his fists. "Then we don't have a choice." Voss nodded. "We have to leave." The words felt like a defeat, but Kane knew there was no other way. Erebus-9 was no longer a home. It was a graveyard. The survivors gathered in the central plaza. What was left of it? Some sat on broken crates, their eyes hollow with grief. Others worked tirelessly, patching up wounds and salvaging whatever they could. There was no cheering, no celebration, only the quiet acceptance of what they had lost. Kane stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. He saw hardened soldiers, weary engineers, civilians clutching whatever belongings they could carry. They had all fought, they had all suffered, and now they had to start over. He took a deep breath and spoke. "We did what they thought was impossible," he said. His voice was rough, but steady. "The XLNRA came here to finish us, to wipe us out, but they failed." The people listened in silence, their tired eyes locked on him. "They thought we were weak," Kane continued. "That we would break, that we would surrender. They were wrong." A few heads lifted. "We lost a home today," he admitted, "but we didn't lose our future. Because as long as one of us still stands, humanity lives." The silence stretched for a moment. Then someone murmured, "We're still here." Another voice, "We're not done." And then more. A quiet, unbroken truth passing through the survivors. Kane nodded. They weren't beaten. Not yet. The evacuation began. The remaining ships were loaded with whatever supplies could be saved. Damaged vessels were patched together just enough to make one last journey. Engineers worked through the night, stripping down the colony for anything useful: fuel, weapons, medical supplies. Kane oversaw the operation, exhaustion clawing at him, but he refused to stop. Voss approached, holding a tablet. "We have a destination." Kane raised an eyebrow. "There's an old refueling station on the edge of the Helios belt," she explained. "Abandoned for years, but the scanners show it's still intact. If we can reach it, we can regroup, repair our ships, and plan our next move. Kane studied the data. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. He nodded. We go. The last ship lifted off just before dawn. Kane stood in the open hangar, watching as the once thriving colony faded beneath the clouds of smoke and ruin. Erebus 9 had been a symbol of resistance, a place where humanity had refused to bow. And now, it was gone. But as he turned toward the cockpit, he knew the fight wasn't over. The Excellenary thought they had broken them. They were wrong. Humanity wasn't finished. Not by a long shot.